The portfolio hit the floor with a thud that echoed through the boardroom, papers scattering across polished marble like autumn leaves. My hands trembled as I dropped to my knees, scrambling to gather the quarterly reports I'd spent 3 nights perfecting. Laughter erupted around me, sharp, cruel, the kind that cuts deeper than any physical wound. Can someone explain why we're wasting company resources on an omega who can't even hold his materials properly? Marcus's voice dripped with contempt as he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his expensive suit. The head of operations always had that smug expression, like he owned the world and everyone in it was simply decoration. I kept my head down, fingers working frantically to collect the scattered documents. Blood rushed to my face, heat spreading from my collar to my hairline. This wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last. 3 months of internship had taught me that much. Maybe filing is too complex, Rachel chimed in from across the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her tablet. We should assign him to coffee duty, full-time. At least then the damage would be limited to beverage spillage. More laughter. I felt rather than saw someone's foot deliberately nudge a folder just as I reached for it, sending it sliding further away. The humiliation tasted bitter on my tongue, metallic and wrong. I wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never return. But I needed this internship, needed the credit hours, needed the reference that would never come. My fingers finally closed around the last document when I noticed the cut. A paper edge had sliced across my palm, thin and precise. Blood welled up, bright red against pale skin. Perfect. Just perfect. Meeting adjourned, Marcus announced with dismissive finality. Clearly we're not getting anything productive done today. I stood on shaking legs, clutching my damaged portfolio to my chest like a shield. The boardroom emptied quickly, executives and managers filing out with barely concealed snickers. No one helped. No one ever did. I headed toward the restrooms, desperate for privacy to compose myself, to stop the threatening tears before they could fall. Ground floor is restricted, a security guard informed me at the stairwell, his tone apologetic but firm. Chairman's doing a security sweep. You'll need to use the 3rd floor facilities. Of course, even basic dignity was being denied today. I nodded mutely and took the stairs, each step feeling like a small defeat. The 3rd floor was executive territory, rarely occupied by lowly interns like myself. But desperation overrode protocol. The conference room stood empty, door slightly ajar. I slipped inside, drawn to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Sunset painted the skyline in shades of amber and rose, glass towers reflecting dying light like scattered jewels. Beautiful and completely indifferent to human suffering. I pulled out my ID badge, staring at the photo and text. Jason Hayes, intern, temporary status. Temporary, the word defined my entire existence. Temporary presence, temporary value, temporary tolerance. Nothing permanent, nothing secure. The door opened without warning, no courtesy knock to announce the intrusion. I spun around, heart lurching into my throat, expecting another manager ready to lecture me about unauthorized room access. Instead, I found myself face to face with someone entirely different. He was tall, easily 6'3", dressed in a black turtleneck and tailored slacks that probably cost more than my entire semester's tuition. Silver threaded through dark hair at his temples, adding distinction rather than age. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. Ice blue, sharp enough to dissect, currently fixed on me with unsettling intensity. Interesting location for an authorized break, he observed, voice smooth as expensive whiskey with an underlying edge that suggested danger. Care to explain what you're doing in a restricted conference room during a security lockdown? My mouth opened, closed, opened again. Words tangled on my tongue, refusing to cooperate. The guard said. I wasn't trying to breach protocol. He stepped further inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Because that's precisely what this looks like. An intern alone in an executive space, during a security sweep. For all I know, you're photographing confidential documents. No, the denial burst out, desperate and too loud. I swear I was looking. Calm yourself. His tone shifted slightly, less accusatory but no less commanding. He moved closer and that's when it hit me. His scent, burnt amber and worn leather, rich and complex, the unmistakable signature of an alpha. Not just any alpha, there was a depth to it, a concentration that spoke of power and dominance. My omega biology recognized it instantly, every instinct screaming contradictory messages: flee, submit, trust, fear. My knees went weak. I locked them, refusing to show more vulnerability than I already had. "You're bleeding," he stated, gaze dropping to my hands. Before I could react, he'd crossed the remaining distance and caught my wrist, holding it up to examine the cut. His touch was surprisingly gentle, clinical even, but it sent electricity racing up my arm. He produced a handkerchief from his pocket, actual cloth, not disposable tissue, and pressed it against the wound with practiced efficiency. "Paper cut from the incident downstairs, I presume." How did he know about that? My confusion must have shown because he continued, "Glass walls, transparent floors." I saw the entire performance in the boardroom. Mortification crashed over me in waves. He'd witnessed my humiliation. This powerful, commanding stranger had watched me scramble on the floor like a desperate animal. "Your badge," he said, still holding my wrist, his other hand reaching toward the ID clipped to my shirt. Not touching me, just reading. "Jason Hayes, intern. You're assigned to operations under Fletcher." "Yes, sir," I managed, voice barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "How long has this been happening?" "I don't." "The harassments, the deliberate sabotage. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was an isolated incident." I swallowed hard, throat clicking. 3 months. Since I started, and you reported it to Human Resources. They said it was an adjustment period. That I was being oversensitive. Something flickered in those ice blue eyes. Anger perhaps, though tightly controlled. He released my wrist carefully, stepping back to create professional distance. The handkerchief remained pressed to my palm, already spotted with red. "The dispensary is on this floor," he said. "That cut needs proper cleaning and bandaging. Come." It wasn't a request. The command in his voice activated something primal in my omega nature, the instinct to obey authority. But more than that, something about him felt safe. Dangerous. Yes, but safe. "I don't even know who you are," I said, even as my feet began moving to follow him. He paused at the door, glancing back with an expression I couldn't quite read. Professional courtesy mixed with something darker, more personal. "Dominic Kane," he said simply. "Chairman and CEO." The world tilted sideways. "Chairman?" I'd just been found by the chairman during a security breach, bleeding and emotionally compromised in an unauthorized conference room. My career, such as it was, had just ended before it truly began. But Dominic was already walking, expecting me to follow. And despite every logical reason to panic, I did. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly as I followed Dominic toward the executive dispensary, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every employee we passed stopped mid-step, eyes widening in recognition and shock. The chairman didn't personally escort people, especially not lowly interns with blood-stained handkerchiefs pressed to their palms. "Sir, I can find it myself," I attempted, voice shakier than I wanted. "You don't need to." "Continue walking, Jason." Not harsh, but absolutely final. The kind of tone that ended arguments before they began. The dispensary was pristine and well-stocked, more like a private medical suite than a corporate first aid station. A nurse looked up from her computer, surprise flashing across her features before professional composure settled in. "Mr. Kane," she greeted, already standing. "Is everything—" "Minor laceration requiring attention," Dominic interrupted smoothly, gesturing toward me. "Please see to it." The nurse guided me to a cushioned chair while Dominic positioned himself against the far wall, arms crossed, observing with that same unsettling intensity from earlier. I felt exposed under his gaze, like a specimen under microscopic examination. "How did this happen?" the nurse asked gently, cleaning the cut with antiseptic that stung sharper than expected. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Admitting the truth felt like weakness. Lying felt impossible with Dominic's eyes boring into me. "It occurred during a deliberate incident," Dominic supplied when my silence stretched too long. Security footage captured the entire sequence. Rachel Torres kicked documents from Mr. Hayes' reach, causing the injury. The nurse's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. She said nothing, but her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. When she finished, "Cut cleaned?" Antibacterial ointment applied. Small bandage secured. Dominic thanked her with courteous brevity and indicated I should follow him again. We rode the elevator in suffocating silence, his scent filling the enclosed space until I could barely think straight. Burnt amber and leather, overwhelming and intoxicating. Where are we going? I finally asked as the elevator climbed past the standard office floors. My office. We need to discuss what happened today. Dread coiled in my stomach. Was I being fired? Reprimanded for causing disruption? The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, revealing sleek modern design that screamed wealth and power. Everything was glass and chrome and expensive minimalism. Dominic's office occupied the corner suite with panoramic city views that made my earlier conference room glimpse seem insignificant. He gestured toward a leather couch, settling into the adjacent chair rather than behind his imposing desk. The gesture felt deliberately casual, minimizing the power differential even as his presence dominated the space. Would you like coffee? Water? He offered. Water. Please? I whispered, throat suddenly parched. He poured from a crystal decanter himself, no assistant summoned, no delegation, just him, serving me in his private office. The surreal quality of the situation made my head spin. I review security footage regularly, Dominic began, settling back with his own glass. Standard protocol for maintaining workplace safety and compliance. What I observed today prompted immediate concern. My hands gripped the water glass, knuckles whitening. It's not as bad as it looked. Don't. The single word cut through my excuse with surgical precision. Don't minimize what happened. The boardroom incident was the fourth documented occurrence this week alone. I counted 7 total instances over the past 3 months. 7. He'd counted, cataloged, paid attention when no one else had. I tried reporting it, I heard myself admit, words tumbling out despite my intention to stay silent. Human resources told me I was being too sensitive, that workplace dynamics take time to establish, that as an omega I needed to develop thicker skin. Dominic's expression hardened, jaw muscles tightening. Unacceptable, completely and utterly unacceptable. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving rapidly across the screen. I've just summoned the HR director Marcus Fletcher and Rachel Torres to a conference room meeting in 20 minutes. You don't have to attend if you're uncomfortable. No. The word emerged stronger than I expected, surprising us both. I want to be there. Dominic studied me for a long moment, something that might have been respect flickering in his gaze. It won't be easy. They'll defend themselves, make excuses, potentially attack your credibility. I understand. And I did. But something had shifted in me during the past hour. Dominic's attention, his obvious anger on my behalf, had sparked something that felt dangerously close to courage. If I don't face them now, it'll never stop. Fair assessment. He stood towering over me even when I rose to my feet. Then we handle this together. But Jason, he paused, making sure I met his eyes. What happens in that meeting will set precedent. Are you prepared for potential consequences? I thought about 3 months of humiliation. 3 months of scattered papers and mocking laughter and casual cruelty disguised as office culture. 3 months of being made to feel worthless. I'm ready, I confirmed. The 20 minutes passed too quickly and too slowly. Simultaneously, Dominic made phone calls while I sat in mounting anxiety, trying to prepare mentally for confrontation. Finally, his assistant appeared at the door. They're assembled in conference room A. Mr. Kane. We walked together, Dominic matching his longer stride to mine. Employees who saw us coming suddenly found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Word had clearly spread that something significant was happening. Conference room A was larger than the one where I'd hidden earlier, with a massive table and high-backed chairs that made me feel even smaller. Marcus sat at one end, forced casualness in his posture. Rachel perched nearby, perfectly composed except for the nervous tapping of one heel. Mrs. Patterson, the HR director, occupied the middle, her expression professionally neutral but eyes cautious. Dominic didn't waste time on pleasantries. He activated the wall-mounted screen and began playing footage chronologically. Each clip showed another incident. Marcus deliberately bumping my shoulder, sending coffee across my reports. Rachel's hand shooting out to knock files from my desk. Today's bag-throwing performance. The file kick that caused my injury. 7 incidents. Just as he'd said. Undeniable. Documented. Damning. Rachel's face lost color progressively with each clip. Marcus maintained his composure better, but I noticed his hands clenching beneath the table. Perhaps we should discuss context. Marcus started when the footage ended. Context? Dominic's voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of calm that preceded storms. Please. Enlighten me. What possible context justifies 3 months of systematic harassment targeting an employee based on their biological designation? Silence answered him, heavy and condemning. Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat nervously. If Mr. Hayes didn't file an official complaint, he did. Dominic slid a tablet across the table. 3 separate emails to your department. All dismissed. All ignored. All violations of company policy and federal anti-discrimination law. I watched Mrs. Patterson's face as she read, horror dawning as she realized the magnitude of her department's failure. Then Dominic turned to me. Jason, would you like to address them directly? This was it. My moment to either find my voice or remain silent forever. I drew a shaking breath and stood, facing the people who'd made my life miserable. You targeted me because I'm an Omega and an intern. I began, voice trembling but audible. You destroyed my work. Humiliated me publicly, hurt me physically. My voice cracked but I pushed Tersh. I just wanted to stop. I want no one else to experience what I did here. The words hung in the air between us, irreversible and true. The silence following my statement felt alive, pulsing with tension and unspoken reckonings. Rachel's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the paleness spreading across her cheeks. Marcus's jaw worked soundlessly, searching for arguments that wouldn't come. Dominic stood, commanding attention without effort. Marcus Fletcher, Rachel Torres, your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. You have 1 hour to collect personal belongings under supervision. You can't be serious. Marcus shot to his feet, composure finally cracking. Over some intern's hurt feelings? I have seniority. Performance reviews. You have documented evidence of federal crimes. Dominic countered, voice cutting like ice. Workplace harassment based on protected biological designation. Destruction of company property. Creation of a hostile work environment. Would you prefer I involve law enforcement? Or will you exit quietly? The threat landed with nuclear weight. Marcus's face cycled through fury, disbelief, and finally resignation. He knew he'd lost. They all did. Rachel tried a different approach, tears welling in carefully lined eyes. Please, Mr. Kane. I made mistakes but I can't lose this job. My career should have considered that before systematically tormenting a colleague, Dominic replied without sympathy. Mrs. Patterson, you'll conduct a comprehensive review of HR procedures and submit recommendations for preventing future failures. I expect the report within 72 hours. The HR director nodded frantically, already making notes with shaking hands. Security arrived within minutes, professional and efficient. Marcus left with rigid dignity, refusing to look at anyone. Rachel's departure involved more drama, choked sobs and pleading glances that found no sympathy. When the door finally closed behind them, the room felt larger, emptier. Mrs. Patterson excused herself hastily, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. Then it was just Dominic and me, alone in the conference room with the weight of what had just transpired settling over us. How are you holding up? Dominic asked, his earlier coldness melting into something gentler. I don't know, I admitted honestly. Relief mixed with guilt, satisfaction tangled with uncertainty. I didn't expect, terminations appropriate given the circumstances. Dominic finished. Jason, what they did violated multiple policies and laws. This isn't about revenge or overreaction. It's about accountability and preventing future incidents. He moved to the windows, gazing out at the city sprawl below. I've been reviewing your file extensively since this afternoon. Your university transcripts, recommendation letters, the thesis you wrote on sustainable corporate restructuring. My heart stuttered. He'd researched me? That was just academic work. That was brilliant work, he corrected, turning to face me. Your professors recommended it for publication. You placed first in a national crisis management simulation. Your analytical skills are exceptional. Where was this going? I remained silent, afraid speaking might shatter whatever was building. I have a proposition for you, Dominic continued. returning to his chair and leaning forward with focused intensity. Executive training program. You'd work directly under my supervision, learning operations from the highest level. Strategy, negotiations, leadership development. Real-world application of everything you've studied theoretically. My brain struggled to process his words. I'm just an intern, barely qualified for the position I already have. You're more qualified than half my current executives, he interrupted firmly. The difference is opportunity and experience. I'm offering both. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why me? There must be dozens of candidates better suited, because I recognize potential when I see it. Dominic's gaze held mine. Unwavering. Because you've demonstrated resilience, intelligence, and integrity under circumstances that would have broken lesser individuals. And because I'm searching for someone to eventually succeed me. The word successor hung between us like a detonated bomb. I actually laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. You can't be serious. I can barely survive office politics, and you're talking about succession. Surviving and leading are different skills. Dominic countered. You survived 3 months of targeted harassment without retaliating, without compromising your work quality, without losing your fundamental decency. That demonstrates character most leaders never develop. He stood, crossing to stand directly in front of me, close enough that his scent, burnt amber and leather, filled my senses completely. I'm not suggesting you'll take over tomorrow. This is a long-term investment. Years of training, mentorship, gradual responsibility increase. But I believe you have the raw materials to become something exceptional. My throat felt tight with emotions I couldn't name. What if I fail? What if I can't meet your expectations? Then we adjust and try again, he said simply. Failure is part of learning. What matters is willingness to attempt, to grow, to persist despite setbacks. I thought about my tattered internship, my damaged confidence, my uncertain future. Then I thought about Dominic's unwavering belief, his anger on my behalf, his investment in my potential. Okay, I whispered. Yes, I'll do it. Something that might have been satisfaction flickered across Dominic's features. Good. We start tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Dress professionally. You'll be attending high-level meetings. Can you manage that timeline? Yes, sir. Dominic, he corrected. When we're working together, use my name. We'll maintain professional hierarchy publicly. But in private, I prefer directness. The intimacy of that request sent unexpected warmth through my chest. Dominic, I tested, the name feeling foreign and right simultaneously. He smiled, then genuine and transformative. Completely different from his earlier corporate mask. Better. Now practical matters. You'll need appropriate attire. My assistant will provide information on our company outfitter. Expenses will be covered as part of the training program. I can't accept. You can and will, he stated flatly. This is a business investment, Jason, not charity. I'm equipping you with tools necessary for success. Would you argue about receiving a computer or office supplies? Put that way, refusal seemed irrational. I understand. Excellent. Dominic glanced at his watch. A sleek piece of engineering that probably cost more than my car. It's nearly 7. You should head home. Get rest. Tomorrow begins your real education. I nodded, gathering my battered portfolio and damaged dignity, preparing to leave. At the door, I paused, looking back at him. Dominic, thank you for everything today. He met my gaze across the conference room, something unreadable in his ice blue eyes. Don't thank me yet. I'm going to work you harder than you've ever been worked. Push you past limits you didn't know you had. Demand excellence you're not sure you can achieve. I know, I said, and somehow I did. Then prepare yourself. His voice carried weight beyond mere words, promise and challenge combined. Because tomorrow everything changes. I left feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, walking toward an uncertain future with more hope than I'd possessed in months. Behind me, through the glass walls, I could see Dominic's silhouette against the darkening sky. Powerful, solitary, waiting. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m., dragging me from restless sleep, filled with anxiety dreams about boardrooms and judgmental eyes. I'd accepted Dominic's offer, but the reality of what that meant hit me like cold water as I stood in my cramped apartment bathroom, staring at my reflection. Today I would enter a world I barely understood, surrounded by people who had decades of experience I lacked. The thrift store suit hung in my closet, navy blue, slightly worn at the elbows, but the best I could afford on an intern's non-existent salary. I dressed carefully, trying to project confidence I didn't feel, and caught the early train to avoid any possibility of tardiness. At 6:45 a.m., the executive floor was already humming with quiet activity. I stepped off the elevator, heart hammering, and immediately spotted Dominic through his office's glass walls. He sat surrounded by files and open laptops, a steaming mug at his elbow, completely absorbed in whatever document commanded his attention. Even at this ungodly hour, he radiated controlled power. He glanced up as I approached, and something that might have been approval flickered across his features. "Punctuality matters in this environment," he stated, gesturing for me to enter. "You've made a positive first impression." I settled into the chair he indicated, trying not to fidget. Dominic slid a tablet across the desk. "Today's agenda, review it." My eyes scanned the schedule and my stomach dropped. Investor breakfast at 8. Board review at 11. Acquisition negotiation at 2. And somehow, impossibly, a charity gala that evening. "I don't understand the last item," I managed. "A gala. High-profile fundraising event," Dominic explained, his tone suggesting this was routine. "Black tie, major donors, stakeholders, political figures. You'll attend as my guest." "I've never been to anything like that," I admitted, panic creeping into my voice. "I don't even own formal wear, which is why arrangements have been made." He stood, collecting his coffee. "A stylist will meet you at 4 to prepare you for the evening. But first, we have more immediate concerns. The investor breakfast begins in 1 hour. Walking there will give me time to brief you on who you'll meet." We rode the elevator down in silence. But as we crossed the lobby toward the street, Dominic began speaking in low, rapid tones. "Gerald Thornton controls the majority investment portfolio. Conservative approach, risk-averse, values stability over innovation. His concern will be quarterly performance. Marina Castell represents venture capital interests. She'll push for aggressive expansion. They balance each other usually." My head spun trying to absorb the information. "What do you need from me?" "Observation primarily," Dominic replied as we entered a sleek restaurant where a private room had been reserved. "But I may ask your opinion on specific points. Don't panic. Just answer honestly based on what you know." The breakfast meeting proved more intense than I'd anticipated. 6 investors occupied the table, each one sharper and more demanding than the last. They dissected every aspect of quarterly projections, challenging Dominic's expansion plans and questioning risk management strategies. I watched him deflect each attack with precision, backing every response with data and projections, never becoming defensive despite the aggressive interrogation. Halfway through, Dominic turned to me unexpectedly. "Jason, given current market trends and our historical performance data, do you find the Q3 projection realistic?" Every eye shifted to me. My throat went dry. This was a test, not just of knowledge, but of composure under pressure. I drew a careful breath, pulling up everything I'd studied in the files Dominic had provided. "Based on the financial models I reviewed, the projection actually appears conservative. If we optimize the supply chain as proposed, we could potentially exceed targets by 12%. Dominic's slight smile told me I'd answered correctly. Precisely the conclusion our analysis supports. Marina Castell leaned forward with interest. "You've reviewed the supply chain optimization proposal?" "Yes, ma'am. The efficiency gains in the logistics sector alone could reduce operational costs significantly." The investors exchanged glances, and I realized Dominic had deliberately positioned me to demonstrate competence. The rest of the meeting proceeded with occasional questions directed my way. Nothing I couldn't handle, but enough to establish my presence as meaningful rather than ornamental. When we finally departed, Dominic handed me a fresh coffee as we walked back. "You performed well. The nervousness didn't I was terrified," I confessed. "Terror and composure aren't mutually exclusive," he replied. "You're learning to manage pressure. That's the critical skill." His expression shifted, becoming more serious. "The board review this afternoon will be different, more political, more personal. There are directors who question my decisions, particularly regarding your promotion. My promotion? Confusion must have shown on my face. You're now officially the youngest executive trainee in company history, Dominic explained. And an omega. Both factors make certain board members uncomfortable. Expect challenges to your presence, your qualifications, your legitimacy. Ma'am, you earned this position through merit. Their approval isn't required. The warning settled in my stomach like lead. I'd faced harassment from coworkers, but board-level opposition represented a different magnitude of problem entirely. We spent the late morning in Dominic's office, reviewing contracts and strategic plans. He explained the reasoning behind various business decisions, testing my comprehension with pointed questions. Around noon, his assistant brought lunch, expensive salads neither of us had time to properly enjoy. The board members you'll meet, Dominic said between bites, aren't all hostile. Director Chen supports innovation and merit-based advancements. Director Williams is neutral but fairness-oriented. Your main concern is Dalton. What's his issue? Traditional hierarchy, biological determinism, general resistance to change. Dominic's jaw tightened slightly. He believes omegas lack the temperament for executive leadership. Your very presence challenges his worldview. Should I expect him to be openly hostile? He'll couch it in professional concern. Questions about experience, readiness, appropriateness. Don't let him bait you into emotional responses. Stay factual, confident, professional. At 11 sharp, we entered the boardroom. 8 directors occupied the long table, faces ranging from curious to openly skeptical. Dominic began with routine updates, but tension crackled beneath the surface like electricity before a storm. Then Dalton struck. Before we proceed further, I'd like to address a procedural concern. His voice carried false reasonableness that set my teeth on edge. This executive training program, specifically Mr. Hayes's appointment, wasn't brought before the board for approval. Given the unprecedented nature of promoting an inexperienced Omega intern to such a position, I believe this warrants discussion. Murmurs rippled around the table. I kept my expression neutral despite the rage building in my chest. Dominic's posture didn't change, but I sensed his focus sharpening. Are you questioning the appointment's legitimacy? Dominic's tone remained calm, but danger lurked beneath. Or suggesting merit-based selection shouldn't apply to Omega candidates? I'm suggesting, Dalton continued carefully, that optics matter. This appears to be favoritism rather than strategic planning. Jason graduated top of his class, Dominic stated flatly. His thesis on sustainable corporate restructuring received publication recommendations from 3 professors. He scored highest in a national crisis management simulation. Would you like me to continue listing qualifications, or shall we discuss why you find merit insufficient in this specific case? The accusation of discrimination hung unspoken but clear. Dalton shifted uncomfortably. Experience is gained through opportunity, Dominic interrupted. Which is exactly what this program provides. Unless you're arguing that certain demographics inherently deserve fewer opportunities. Silence answered him. No one wanted to publicly align with that position. Dominic turned to me. Jason, please stand and explain your thesis work to the board. My heart hammered as I rose, but I refused to show weakness. This was my moment to prove I belonged here, not through Dominic's protection, but through my own merit. Standing before the board felt like facing an execution squad. Every eye trained on me with varying degrees of skepticism and hostility. I drew a steadying breath and began explaining the economic restructuring models I'd developed, risk mitigation strategies, the data analysis that supported my conclusions. As I spoke, something shifted inside me. This was my domain: theory and analysis, patterns and projections. The nervousness didn't disappear, but it became background noise rather than paralysis. My voice grew stronger, more confident as I walked them through the frameworks I'd created. The traditional approaches to corporate restructuring focus primarily on cost reduction, I explained, warming to the subject. But my model incorporates sustainability metrics and employee retention data, which historical analysis shows produces better long-term stability. The initial investment is higher, but 5-year projections demonstrate significantly improved outcomes. Director Chen, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, leaned forward with genuine interest. You developed this framework independently? My professor provided mentorship and guidance, but the core methodology is original work. Yes. She glanced at Dominic with something that looked like respect. Impressive credentials for someone his age. Dalton still appeared unconvinced, but his arguments had lost their foundation. Without direct evidence of incompetence or favoritism, his objections sounded increasingly like prejudice rather than legitimate concern. The meeting concluded with grudging acceptance if not enthusiasm. As board members filed out, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Director Williams, an older gentleman with kind eyes. Well presented, young man. Don't let Dalton discourage you. Some people resist change simply because it's change. Thank you, sir. When the room finally emptied, leaving just Dominic and me, I allowed myself to collapse into a chair. That was brutal. You handled it perfectly, Dominic assured me. Professional, knowledgeable, unshakable. Exactly what was needed. I was about to respond when Dalton reappeared in the doorway. Mr. Hayes. A word. Dominic's expression darkened, but I stood. Of course. In the hallway, Dalton's pleasant facade evaporated. You're clever, I'll grant you that. But this protection you're enjoying, it won't last forever. One significant mistake, just one, and I'll personally ensure your removal from this company. Something in his tone triggered defiance rather than fear. I met his gaze steadily. Then I won't make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Dalton countered. Particularly inexperienced omegas playing at jobs beyond their capability. Is there a problem here? Dominic's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He'd appeared silently, positioning himself slightly between Dalton and me, simply offering mentorship advice. Dalton replied smoothly. Threatening junior employees constitutes grounds for removal from the board. Dominic stated with deadly calm. I'd hate to pursue that course of action, but I will if necessary. Dalton's face reddened, but he retreated without further comment. When he disappeared around the corner, Dominic turned to me. How did you respond to him? Told him I wouldn't make mistakes. Good instinct. Never show weakness to predators. He checked his watch. We have 90 minutes before the acquisition negotiation. Come to my office. I'll brief you on the opposing company's position. The acquisition negotiation proved more collaborative than confrontational, though the stakes were enormous. A mid-sized competitor wanted to be absorbed into our company, but the terms required careful navigation. Dominic included me in the discussion, asking my input on specific contract clauses and valuation metrics. I walked a careful line between confidence and humility, offering opinions when asked but deferring to Dominic's greater experience on complex legal matters. By the meeting's end, the preliminary agreement had been sketched out, pending final approval from both companies' legal teams. The rival CEO, a weathered businessman named Patterson, actually shook my hand as we concluded. Sharp mind, you've got there, son. Kane made a good choice bringing you into the fold. Thank you, sir. After they departed, Dominic allowed himself a small smile. You're adapting faster than I anticipated. Most trainees would still be overwhelmed at this stage. I am overwhelmed, I admitted. I'm just getting better at hiding it. That's called professional development. He glanced at his watch again. The stylist should be arriving shortly. I'll have my assistant show you to the preparation room. An hour later, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The stylist had worked miracles. Tailored tuxedo in deep charcoal, crisp white shirt, perfectly knotted bow tie. My hair had been styled into something resembling sophistication, and even my posture seemed improved. Transformation complete, the stylist announced with satisfaction. You clean up remarkably well, Mr. Hayes. Dominic appeared in the doorway and my breath caught. He wore a classic black tuxedo that emphasized his height and commanding presence, silver cufflinks glinting at his wrists. When his eyes met mine in the mirror, something intense flickered there before he masked it. Acceptable, he said neutrally. The car is waiting. The gala venue was a historic hotel downtown, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers. As we entered the ballroom, I felt dozens of eyes turn toward us, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. Who's that with Kane? Never seen him before. An Omega. Interesting choice. My discomfort must have shown because Dominic moved closer, his hand settling briefly against my lower back, a grounding touch that helped anchor me. Just breathe, he murmured. You belong here as much as anyone else in this room. The gesture helped more than it should have, calming my racing Omega instincts in a way that felt almost dangerous. I couldn't afford to develop dependencies. especially not on someone who held such power over my career. The first hour involved endless networking. Dominic introduced me to an overwhelming parade of donors, politicians and business leaders, always with the same phrase, "My successor in training, Jason Hayes." The reactions varied wildly. Some showed genuine curiosity, others barely concealed skepticism. A few displayed hostility they were too polite to voice directly. An elderly CEO named Morrison engaged me in actual conversation. "How old are you, Mr. Hayes?" "23, sir." Morrison shook his head with something between amusement and disbelief. "Kane, you're either brilliant or insane. I haven't decided which." "Strategic planning requires calculated risk," Dominic replied smoothly. "Jason represents significant potential return on investment." "We'll see," Morrison said. But his tone wasn't unkind. "Good luck, young man. You'll need it." As he departed, I turned to Dominic. "Does everyone think you've lost your mind?" "Probably," he admitted with the ghost of a smile. "Pioneering decisions always appear reckless until they prove successful." Then the evening took an unexpected turn. Across the ballroom, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Raised voices, security personnel moving quickly. Through the crowd, I glimpsed a familiar figure being restrained, Rachel. Drunk, disheveled, mascara smeared down her cheeks, forcing her way past security with wild determination. "This is all his faults," she screamed, pointing directly at me with an unsteady finger. "That pathetic Omega seduced the chairman. I lost everything because of him." The entire ballroom fell into shocked silence. Hundreds of guests frozen mid-conversation as Rachel's accusation echoed off marble walls. Security moved to escort her out, but Dominic raised a hand, stopping them. The gesture commanded absolute authority. Everyone waited to see how he would handle this very public disruption. "Miss Torres," Dominic said, his voice carrying clearly despite its measured tone, "you were terminated for documented violations of federal anti-discrimination law. Jason had nothing to do with your choices or their consequences." Rachel swayed slightly, fighting to focus. "You can't possibly believe that. He's manipulating you using Omega tricks." "I believe documented evidence," Dominic interrupted calmly. "Security footage, written complaints, witness testimony, all of which supports the termination decision. Your current behavior simply reinforces the assessment that you lack the professionalism this company must." The crowd murmured, some nodding agreement. Rachel's face crumpled, the fight draining from her posture. But Dominic turned to me, a silent question in his eyes. Did I want to respond? This was my moment. Not to attack or humiliate, but to demonstrate the maturity that would justify Dominic's faith in me. I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my system. "Rachel, I don't fear you anymore," I stated clearly. "What you did was wrong, the harassment, the sabotage, all of it. But I won't let your actions define my worth. I'm here because I've earned this opportunity through my own merit. And I'll continue proving that every single day." Rachel's eyes glistened with tears. Shame, anger, regret all mixing together. She opened her mouth as if to respond, then simply shook her head and allowed security to guide her away. The crowd's whispers intensified, but now they carried notes of approval rather than scandal. An older woman approached me, extending her hand. "Grace Wellington, major donor." "That was handled with remarkable restraint, Mr. Hayes. Many people in your position would have chosen cruelty." "Cruelty serves no purpose," I replied, shaking her hand. "I just want to move forward." "Admirable philosophy." She glanced at Dominic. "You've chosen well, Kane. I look forward to seeing how this young man develops." As she departed, Dominic touched my elbow. "Let's step outside for a moment. You could use some air." The terrace overlooked the city, a kaleidoscope of lights stretching to the horizon. Cool night breeze carried away the ballroom's stifling atmosphere, letting me finally breathe properly. I gripped the railing, processing everything that had happened. "You okay?" Dominic asked, standing beside me. "Honestly, I'm not sure." The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I didn't expect to face her again, especially not like that. "You handled it perfectly, showed strength without vindictiveness, confidence without arrogance." He paused, studying the skyline. "You've exceeded my expectations today, Jason. The investor meeting, the board confrontation, the acquisition negotiation, and now this. Most people would have crumbled under that pressure. I almost did, I admitted. Multiple times. But you didn't. That's what matters. Comfortable silence settled between us, broken only by distant traffic sounds and muffled music from inside. Then Dominic spoke again, his tone shifting to something more personal. I need to tell you something. Something I've been wrestling with since we first met. My heart rate accelerated for reasons having nothing to do with the evening's earlier drama. What is it? When I walked into that conference room and found you there, your scent hit me immediately. Vanilla and fresh rain, distinctive, powerful. It's been distracting. Scent recognition. The biological marker of potential compatibility between alphas and omegas. My breath caught in my throat. You're saying, I'm saying there's attraction, Dominic stated bluntly, still not looking at me. On my part, at minimum. And I need to address it directly because ignoring it would be dishonest. But acting on it would be inappropriate given our current dynamic. I processed his words carefully, aware that my response could change everything. What if I told you the attraction isn't one-sided? He finally turned to face me, ice blue eyes reflecting city lights. Then I'd say the timing is terrible. You're my trainee. I'm your superior. The power imbalance makes any relationship ethically questionable at best, potentially explosive at worst. So we just ignore it? The question came out more frustrated than I intended. No. We acknowledge it and we table it. Dominic's expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. Jason, this training program is real. The succession planning is genuine. None of it is motivated by attraction or biology. You're here because you have genuine potential that deserves development. I believe you, I said quietly. Good. Because here's what I'm proposing. We focus entirely on your professional growth. You work hard, learn everything you can, prove yourself to the board and the industry. When you're truly established, when you're my equal rather than my subordinate, then we revisit this conversation. That could take years, I pointed out. Probably will. He stepped closer, proximity suddenly intimate despite the public setting. But if what we're both feeling is real, it'll still be there when the timing is appropriate. And if it's not, well, time will reveal that too. The logic was sound, even if my omega instincts rebelled against the idea of waiting. You're asking me to be patient. I'm asking you to be smart, Dominic corrected. To prioritize your career development over immediate gratification. To build something sustainable rather than rushing into something that could undermine everything we're trying to achieve. I considered his words, the careful reasoning, the respect embedded in his proposal. He wasn't rejecting me, he was protecting both of us from a potentially destructive mistake. All right. I finally agreed. We wait. I focus on proving myself, building my career, and when I'm truly ready, when I've earned my position rather than just occupying it, we see if this still matters. Relief and something deeper flickered across Dominic's features. Thank you for understanding. One condition though, I added, surprising myself with the boldness. You have to actually give me a fair chance to succeed. No sabotaging my development because you're worried about future complications. A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his usually serious expression. Deal. I promise to make your professional life as challenging and growth-oriented as possible, completely independent of any personal considerations. Perfect. I extended my hand formally. To a productive professional relationship and delayed personal gratification. He shook it, his grip warm and firm. To patience, growth, and seeing where we both end up. We stood there for another moment, hands clasped, city lights surrounding us, both understanding we just made a pact that would define the next chapter of our lives. Then Dominic released my hand and gestured back toward the ballroom. We should return. There are still several important contacts you need to meet, and your education is far from complete. I followed him back inside, feeling simultaneously disappointed and hopeful. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and scrutiny and constant pressure to prove I belonged. But for the first time since this entire journey began, I truly believed I could do it. Not because Dominic believed in me, though that helped, but because I was starting to believe in myself. And that ultimately would make all the difference.